Welcome to the Deep Dive. You've given us quite the stack of sources here, everything from, wow, historical legal texts to modern fantasy books, all focused on one figure, the witch.
It's a huge range, definitely, spanning centuries and genres.
So today, our mission, really, is to take all this and map out what has to be one of the most surprising cultural shifts ever. We're tracing how the witch figure went from being something deeply feared, even lethally feared.
Yeah, institutionally feared.
Right, to this incredibly diverse symbol we see today.
Yeah.
Sometimes empowering, even. It's quite a journey.
It really is. From like accusation to identity, the meaning just transforms. We'll try to distill the key moments for you, the historical victim, then that pop culture figure, and finally the modern religious aspect.
We need to understand what drove those changes here.
Exactly, the why behind the what.
Okay, let's start way back at that really sinister foundation. If you just look at old folklore, the basic idea is, well, pretty straightforward, isn't it? An individual, usually a woman, thought to have these harmful supernatural powers. A bad reputation, basically.
Right, but that basic idea got supercharged. You really have to look at the historical Christian beliefs about witchcraft and demonology, especially in the late medieval and early modern period. That's where the intense fear gets codified.
Codified is the right word. I mean, the sources talk about specific texts spreading this fear, like the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches.
Exactly. That text from the late 1400s was incredibly influential. It wasn't just story time. It was presented as a kind of legal and theological guide across Europe.
And it laid out this idea of witchcraft as what can organized heresy.
Yeah, basically. A conspiracy often involving pacts with the devil, framed in, well, quite misogynistic terms. It heavily linked women with sorcery and supposed moral weakness.
Giving a sort of intellectual cover for what came next.
Precisely. It provided that justification.
And the wider situation didn't help either, did it? It wasn't just religious ideas floating around. There was real instability.
Oh, absolutely. You connect the dots in the sources and you see the witch hunts in early modern Europe often flared up during times of major stress, like crop failures, disease, religious wars.
Makes sense. People look for someone to blame.
And witchcraft accusations were just convenient, a way to channel all that societal anxiety, particularly targeting women who didn't fit the mold. You know, widows, healers, maybe women who were just a bit too independent.
And the result was just brutal. Actual persecution across Europe, then later in places like colonial America. Yeah. The numbers are staggering.
They really are. Thousands. And again, the sources confirm overwhelmingly women were the ones accused, put on trial.
Subjected to torture.
Yes, formal trials, systematic torture, executions. These were real people, not fairy tale characters.
And it's important you remember that. These weren't vague accusations. There were specific methods used to force confessions.
Right, and some sources even mention artwork from the time, like courtroom sketches or illustrations, that actually show these methods. It connects that abstract fear directly to, well, agonizing concrete history.
State-sanctioned terror, essentially. Designed to keep people in line.
To enforce conformity, yeah. Social and religious.
Wow. Okay, that is heavy stuff. And grounding it in that reality is crucial.
Yeah.
But then history takes weird turns. How does a figure tied to actual murder become something else, something more recognizable in pop culture?
Well, that shift from historical victim to like a cultural character is fascinating. It's one of the key transformations we see in the sources as things like the Enlightenment took hold and, you know, legal systems slowly started moving away from torture.
Okay.
The witch sort of retreated from the courtroom and started appearing more in like literature, theater.
Ah, so less of a real-world threat, more of a fictional device.
Exactly. Early modern stories, Gothic novels, they start to solidify the image. You know, the cackling old woman, the potions. It makes her more predictable, less of an immediate danger to society.
A way to handle the fear from a safe distance.
Sort of, yeah. Consuming the terror without the immediate threat.
And then, boom, Hollywood. This is where that very specific look we all picture gets locked in, right?
Absolutely. It's quite amazing how centuries of varied folklore get compressed into this one globally recognized visual shorthand. The pointy hat, the broomstick, often the hooked nose and warts.
That iconic archetype.
Yeah, and it wasn't really ancient folklore that cemented that specific image worldwide. It was 20th century media.
And the sources point a big finger at the Wizard of Oz, don't they?
They really do. That 1939 film was huge. It took bits and pieces of folklore and kind of melted them together into the standard image. Think of the Wicked Witch of the West.
The green skin.
Exactly. The sources note how details that green skin just became instantly accepted, like canonical for people everywhere. It shows how powerful mass media can be in sort of overriding older cultural ideas with one strong visual.
Okay, but wait. If that archetype becomes this standardized, almost cartoonish hag, isn't there a risk there? Doesn't making her a caricature kind of, I don't know, minimize the horror of the actual history?
That's a really important tension.
Turning historical murder into, like, family entertainment.
It is a paradox, and something we definitely need to unpack based on the sources. The suggestion is that this simplification, making her cartoonish, served a purpose. Psychologically, maybe commercially too.
How so?
Well, the archetype acts as a kind of safe container for all that historical terror by making the witch look so grotesque and obviously fictional, green skin, that over-the-top cackle the audience can sort of enjoy the thrill, the spookiness.
Without having to think about the real women who were tortured and killed.
Exactly. Without confronting the fact that the historical trials targeted, their neighbors, local healers, midwives, not cackling villains on broomsticks. It creates distance.
That makes sense. That distance between the brutal reality and the consumable image. That kind of sets the stage for where we are now, doesn't it? This split in how witches are seen today.
Yeah, the modern picture is much more fractured. It's not just one thing anymore. It's about duality and also about reclaiming the image.
So witches can still be the bad guy.
Oh, absolutely. In a lot of contemporary stories, especially maybe for kids, the witch is still that classic sinister figure, the villain you need for a dark fairy tale to work.
Right. But then there's this whole other track, this counter narrative that's become really powerful.
Definitely. Fueled by social shifts, feminist movements. The witch gets completely recast. She becomes a symbol of empowerment, wisdom, maybe someone misunderstood.
In films, books, TV shows.
All over. And when the image is reclaimed like that, the witch stands for autonomy, female strength, maybe challenging the status quo. The very things that got women accused historically, like having knowledge, being independent,
are now the things being celebrated.
It's a total flip, a 180, yeah.
Yeah.
Where a historical accusation becomes something aspirational.
That's incredible, but it's not just about fictional portrayals, is it? There's another layer here.
And this might be the most crucial distinction we need to make looking at all the source material. The word wish today often refers to something completely different. A specific religious path.
You mean Wicca?
Exactly. Let's talk about Wicca for a moment.
Okay, yeah. This is really important for you, the listener, to grasp. Witch isn't just a costume or a story character anymore. For many people, it describes their actual religious practice. Wicca, a modern pagan religion.
And the sources are very clear on this. Wicca is modern, founded in the 20th century, and crucially, it's described as being unrelated to the fearful motifs of folklore.
Unrelated. So completely separate from that historical panic driven by Christian demonology.
Entirely separate. It's vital to make that distinction.
So how does Wicca's philosophy actually differ from that old fearful stereotype? Is there like a core belief that shows the contrast?
Well, a central principle is often summed up in the Wiccan Rede, and it harm none, do what you will. Basically, do what you want as long as you're not harming anyone.
Harm none. That's pretty much the opposite of the historical image of the witch casting harmful spells.
Exactly. The emphasis is on avoiding harm, on reverence for nature, personal spiritual growth, aligning with natural cycles, often healing. It's just a world away from devil worship or cursing neighbors.
So if someone today says, I'm a witch, they're likely talking about that kind of path, a nature-based spirituality.
Very likely, yes. Or some related modern pagan path. It's moved from being an external label, an accusation, to an internal identity, both culturally as a symbol of empowerment and religiously as a specific practice.
Wow. The term itself has survived, but the meaning has been completely transformed, even inverted.
It really shows how resilient concepts can be. The word stuck around, but society refilled it with new meaning, strength where it once meant danger.
Okay, so let's try and tie this all together. What does this massive journey mean? We've gone from Christian-influenced fear leading to actual persecution in early modern Europe,
right,
through that globally recognized movie hag archetype.
Great for entertainment, yeah.
And now we're in this place with diverse modern meanings, including empowerment and a genuine religion like Wicca.
I think the big takeaway, looking across all the sources, is just how incredibly adaptable language and stories are. That single word, which it's like a cultural palimpsest, layers upon layers of meaning.
Palimpsest, yeah, I like that.
Depending on who's using it, when, in what context, it could mean a historical victim crushed by fear, or a profitable cartoon villain, or someone genuinely practicing a modern earth-based religion. The meaning isn't fixed. It reflects the society using the word.
Which leaves us with a thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. Next time you encounter the image of a witch, could be a Halloween costume, an ad, a character in a show, just pause for a second. Think about where that particular image falls on this huge spectrum we've discussed. Is it tapping into the old historical fear? Is it selling modern empowerment? Or is it referencing, maybe even misunderstanding, genuine modern spirituality?
Yeah, it's rarely just one thing.
The fact that one image can hold so much, often all at once. It really says something about how powerful stories are in shaping who we are, even when wrestling with a really dark history. Keep digging into those layers.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. For many of us, when you say witch trials, one image probably jumps right into your head.
Salem.
Exactly. Salem, Massachusetts. It's this stark, chilling story, Puritan fervor, collective delusion. It's become almost a shorthand for mass paranoia in America.
It definitely holds a powerful place in the American cultural imagination, for sure.
But just focusing on that one single intense flashpoint.
Yeah.
That very narrow window in colonial history.
Yeah, you're right. Doing that gives us a really dramatically incomplete picture. This phenomenon was much, much bigger.
And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
The material we've looked at lets us compare the most infamous American case Salem with the huge drawn-out European hunts that actually came before it and inspired it, really.
Right.
We want you to walk away with a hopefully crystal clear view of these judicial proceedings, understand the similarities, but also the really devastating difference in scale.
So maybe we should start with the basics. Like, what were historical witch trials, generally speaking?
Good idea.
At their core, they were essentially judicial proceedings. That's important. They weren't just, random mob actions, even if those happened too. They were actual court cases.
Stemming from what, though?
They really arose from this combustible mix of deep societal fears, pretty rigid religious beliefs, and often these underlying community tensions that are already simmering.
And the specific charge. What were people actually accused of doing?
The main accusation usually centered on making pacts with the devil, and also using maleficia, that's basically harmful magic, to, damage neighbors, kill their livestock, make people sick, things like that.
And we often picture women, but it wasn't exclusively women, right?
No, absolutely not. Our memory often focuses on women, and they were certainly the majority of victims, but it's important to remember men were targeted too, just typically at a much lower rate.
Okay, so a widespread historical reality, not just some weird, isolated thing in one colony.
Precisely. It was an international reality.
All right. Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's use Salem as our specific example first. Kind of set a baseline. We need to nail down the details of the American case before we zoom out.
Okay. Salem was incredibly concentrated and fast-moving. We're talking about a period of just 15 months.
15 months, that's it.
Yeah, pretty much from February 1692 to May 1693. And it was centered in Salem Village, which, just for clarity for listeners, is now known as Danvers in the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
And even for a small colonial settlement back then, the number of accusations, it seems staggering.
It was. In that short time, our sources show more than 200 people were formally accused of witchcraft.
200 people.
Ow!
And the consequences.
They were swift. And final. The records confirm 30 people were convicted during that brief episode.
Executions.
19 individuals were executed by hanging, 14 women and 5 men.
19 people.
Yeah.
You have to imagine the terror in a small community like that, losing 19 people in just months.
Absolutely. The social rupture must have been immense. And we even know the locations, primarily Gallows Hill and Proctor's Ledge in Salem.
Now, when we talk about Salem, there's this one technical legal detail. You mentioned it earlier, but I think we need to underline it. It seems like the factor that just poured gasoline on the fire.
Yes. You mean spectral evidence?
That's the one.
Yeah, that is the crucial sort of judicial nugget. It seems pretty unique to the Salem trials and how central it became, and it really explains why the conviction rate was so high and the panic spread like wildfire.
Okay, break that down for us. What does spectral evidence actually mean if you're the one on trial?
It means the court allowed testimony based on dreams or visions, or even spiritual attacks that the accuser claimed to have suffered from the accused person's spirit or specter.
So wait, someone could claim that my ghost, my specter, appeared to them in a dream and tormented them.
Yes, or even while they were awake. They could say your spirit attacked them yesterday out in a field, even while you, the physical you, were sitting right there in the courtroom.
That seems impossible to defend against.
Precisely. That's the profound judicial problem. Spectral evidence basically removes the possibility of a real defense. How do you prove your spirit didn't do something?
You can't get an alibi for your ghost.
Exactly. It completely flips the burden of proof. Suddenly, the accused has to somehow prove a negative, that their spirit wasn't off causing trouble in someone's vision.
Yeah.
It turned the whole legal process into this kind of theological, psychological mess that the accused could almost never win.
That lack of due process. That's what let the panic just consume the place.
It really did. It made the entire judicial system hostage to subjective claims, to paranoia. Once the court validates something like a vision, where's the foundation?
It's gone.
Utterly. But critically, the system did eventually realize its mistake, or at least backtrack.
How did the trials actually end?
Well, it was directly linked to the colonial governor, Governor Phipps, stepping in. He disbanded the special court, the Court of Oyer and Terminer.
Why? What changed?
Doubts just grew too large, especially about the reliability, the admissibility of that spectral evidence. Even among the ruling class, people started asking, hang on, what if the devil can take the shape of an innocent person to trick us?
So if the evidence itself could be demonic manipulation.
Then the whole system was compromised. They recognized that.
Okay, so summing up Salem,
Yeah.
it's this incredibly intense, powerful example of mass paranoia, a terrible miscarriage of justice in colonial America. And it's largely because of that unique vulnerability to spectral evidence.
Yes, and also the speed of the reversal is important too, I think. It was intense, it was horrifying, but it was contained to those 15 months.
Contained, right?
Exactly. They were contained. And that containment is absolutely key, because now we need to pull the lens way, way back.
Because Salem wasn't happening in a vacuum, was it?
Not at all. It was really just the tail end, a kind of echo of a much, much larger historical event happening across the Atlantic.
Okay, let's pivot then to that global perspective. We're talking about putting Salem, that small, focused American tragedy, into the context of the massive, much longer European dimension.
Right. When we talk about the European witch hunts, we're dealing with a phenomenon that spanned nearly 4 centuries.
4 centuries, yeah.
Yeah, roughly from the 15th century right through into the 18th century. And this is where the sheer scale, it just forces you to recalibrate everything.
Okay, we established Salem, maybe 200 accused, 19 executed. A tragedy, no doubt. But Europe, over those 300 plus years, what are we looking at?
The estimated figure is just staggering. Across Europe, historians estimate something like 100,000 people were prosecuted for witchcraft.
100,000.
100,000 prosecuted. And of those, tens of thousands were executed. Probably somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people killed.
That number, 100,000 prosecuted. It just completely dwarfs Salem. It puts it in a totally different light.
It really does. It's a monumental historical catastrophe that went on not for months, but for centuries.
And where was this happening geographically? Was it everywhere or concentrated?
It was pretty widespread, touched almost every corner of the continent, really, but it was often most intense in Central Europe, places like the German states, Switzerland, and also areas undergoing really profound religious stress like Scotland, France, England, many others too.
So if Salem was uniquely fueled by spectral evidence, what was driving this centuries-long massive persecution in Europe? What kept that fire burning for so long?
Well, in Europe, the trials were deeply interwoven with these huge religious, social, and political upheavals. You have to think about the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation.
Well, that religious conflict.
Exactly. It created intense anxiety about spiritual loyalty, this constant perceived threat from the devil and his agents. That fed directly into mass hunts. Plus, the judicial procedures themselves were often far more severe than in colonial America.
More severe how?
Well, crucially, European judicial systems very often allowed the systematic use of torture to extract confessions.
Okay, that makes a huge difference.
A massive difference. And they were also heavily influenced by these legal and theological treatises. The most famous one is the Malleus Maleficarum.
The Hammer of Witches.
Yeah.
Hang on, for listeners who haven't heard of that, can you just briefly explain what it was and why it mattered so much?
Sure. It was published way back in the late 15th century, 1487, I think, and it was essentially an instruction manual, a legal and theological guide for identifying witches, prosecuting them, and yes, torturing them.
So it laid out the how-to.
It did. It systematized the belief in witchcraft. It argued that failing to prosecute witchcraft was itself heresy, and it gave judges and inquisitors specific methods for overcoming doubt, for getting confessions. It basically provided the legal and religious justification for the whole process.
Wow. So it gave the system a kind of perverse legitimacy.
It absolutely did. It made the proceedings incredibly difficult to challenge or stop once they got going.
So, okay. You've got centuries of religious and political turmoil, social anxieties, plus a legal framework that actively encouraged torture and had this handbook justifying the persecution.
Yeah.
That explains how you get to those horrifying numbers.
Precisely. The severity, the sheer longevity, and that kind of institutional support for the witch hunter. Those are really the distinguishing marks of the European experience compared to Salem.
Right. So let's try to connect the dots now. We've looked at Salem. We've looked at the massive European context. What does it all mean when you put the two continents side by side?
Well, across both continents, the unifying characteristic, the root cause, is fear.
Fear.
Yeah, fear-driven prosecutions of perceived supernatural enemies.
Right.
They almost always spring from intense communal tensions, anxieties, and this profound, very literal belief in the devil and his ability to work through people on Earth.
But that distinction in scale and maybe notoriety, that still seems important for understanding how we remember this history, doesn't it? Europe had the staggering numbers, 100,000 prosecuted. Yet Salem is often the first thing people think of, especially in the New World.
It is. It's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? I think Salem's notoriety probably stems from a few things. First, maybe its isolated, explosive nature in that colonial setting. It was such a sudden, dramatic flashpoint in a society still figuring itself out.
Like a concentrated dose.
Exactly. Second, as we discussed, that really unique and frankly terrifying role played by spectral evidence, that detail just captivates and horrifies people. And third, maybe the speed of the reversal.
The fact that they did recognize the error relatively quickly.
Yeah, the realization that the system had failed came comparatively fast, which maybe makes Salem a more contained, powerful symbol of governmental and judicial folly. It's almost the perfect, short, sharp, cautionary tale.
A cautionary tale. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So to just sort of reiterate that core definition we started with, historical witch trials, whether in Europe or America, were these judicial proceedings deeply rooted in spiritual fear and community tension. Fear was literally given legal weight.
Panic became law. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that leads us right to the key lesson, I think, from looking at this material together. The enduring legacy here is the constant danger of allowing fear, allowing paranoia to overwhelm critical thinking, and crucially, due process within any judicial system.
When you remove that burden of proof,
Whether it's through spectral evidence, like in Salem, or through systematic torture, as often happened in Europe, the system stops being about justice and becomes an engine for producing victims. It becomes an engine for mass injustice.
absolutely. A really sobering thought. And as we wrap up today, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to chew on, building on this comparison we've made. The scale in Europe, as you said, is undeniable. Centuries long, potentially 100,000 people caught up in it. Yet the much smaller tragedy of Salem, concentrated in just those 15 months, remains perhaps the definitive American scar related to this. Why do you think that is? Why did the smaller, contained colonial episode become such a culturally defining symbol of justice gone wrong here in America? Why does that numerically smaller wound often feel so much louder in our historical narrative?
That's a really interesting question to ponder.
Something for y'all to think about. Welcome to the deep dive. So if you're someone who's curious about modern spirituality, maybe history, or the occult, you've definitely bumped into these three terms: witchcraft, Wicca, and paganism.
Yeah.
And they get mixed up a lot, like used as synonyms when they're well, they're not.
No, not at all. And we've looked through the sources you've gathered, and yeah, confusion is understandable, but it causes real problems. So our mission today really is to clear away some of that fog. We want to pull out the actual definitions, the historical backgrounds, the key differences in how they're practiced, what people believe.
Basically, draw some clear lines. Where does one stop and the next one start?
Exactly. And, getting that right isn't just about words. It's pretty crucial if you want to understand the history of magic or what's happening with modern spiritual movements. We're trying to separate out, okay, what's a practice, what's a huge spiritual category, and what's a specific structured modern religion. You mix those up, the whole conversation just kind of falls apart.
Okay, so let's get this straight from the top. They're related, yeah. It's not like they're totally separate things.
Oh, absolutely related. But maybe think of it less like perfect overlaps in a Venn diagram. It's more like maybe nested boxes, or like an umbrella term with specific things happening underneath it. Connected, yes, but distinct.
Distinct, okay.
Good word, yeah.
And to really get that structure, I think we need to start with the most sort of fundamental piece, the skill itself. Let's start with witchcraft.
All right, witchcraft. When we look across all the material, the most basic common definition seems to be it's a practice.
Right.
It's about actually doing things, magical skills, spells, rituals. It's the action.
Precisely. It's the how-to.
Yeah.
And it's ancient. You find forms of it in almost every culture tied to all sorts of folk traditions, occult practices. If someone's casting a protection spell, or maybe gathering herbs with a specific magical intent, or doing a ritual to try and get a certain result, that's witchcraft. They're doing witchcraft.
But how people see that practice, that's changed a lot over time, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, dramatically. Especially through different religious lenses. Historically, particularly in Europe, you often see it first associated with maleficium.
Maleficium, meaning harmful magic, like village quarrels, curses, that sort of.
Exactly. Harmful, manipulative stuff. And it was viewed negatively, for sure, but it wasn't automatically seen as heresy against the church. Not initially.
Okay. So there's a shift coming.
A massive shift. And this is where the historical context gets really crucial, especially when you look at the sources around the witch trials. The real horror, the mass persecutions, that ramps up when the definition pivots. It goes from just maleficium, harmful acts, to being framed as theological heresy.
Meaning it required a pact with the devil. That kind of thing.
That was the accusation, yes. Suddenly, it wasn't just about what you did, like casting a spell. It was about who you supposedly worshipped, what you believed. That's when the practice got tangled up, conflated with a very specific, very negative religious idea imposed from the outside.
That's a critical distinction.
Yeah.
The skill itself versus the theology someone else attaches to it.
Hugely important, because bringing it to today, it means we have to stress. Witchcraft, the practice, can be done completely separately from any formal religion.
So you can be a witch without being religious at all.
Absolutely. You can have what people might call a secular witch, or maybe a folk practitioner. They might use herbs, charms, divination techniques, whatever, but follow no specific god or goddess, no set theology. They're using the skill set. Their intent might be protection, healing, finding lost things. It varies wildly. But this person is practicing witchcraft, yet they wouldn't necessarily identify as pagan or Wiccan. They're focused on the craft itself.
Okay. So if someone asks, is all witchcraft religious? The answer, based on everything we've looked at, is no.
A clear no. It's the application of skills. It can be part of a religion, often is, but it does have to be. Witchcraft is the verb. It's the technology, the doing.
Right. Okay, so if witchcraft is the doing, the practice, and let's zoom out, what's the bigger spiritual picture? What is
Paganism. Okay, yeah. Paganism. This is the big umbrella term. Really big. It basically covers a huge diverse range of traditions, polytheistic ones, animistic ones, nature-based spiritualities. Historically speaking, it usually refers to the religions that were around before or existed outside of the big monotheistic faiths we know today: Christianity, Islam, Judaism.
So like the old gods of Europe, Greece, Rome, the Norse, Celts.
Exactly. Those are the historical roots. It was sort of the default, the native religious landscape in many places before conversions happened.
And you called it an umbrella. Which implies it's not just one thing today either. It must be incredibly diverse.
Oh, absolutely. And that's key. When people talk about paganism now, they often mean neo-paganism, the modern revival or reconstruction of these older ideas. And even within that, you see huge variety. There are maybe two broad approaches people take that really show this diversity.
Okay, what are those? This is interesting.
Well, you've got what are often called reconstructionist paths. These folks are usually focused on trying to revive a specific ancient faith as accurately as possible. So someone might be deeply into historical Norse texts and archaeology to practice asatru, Norse paganism, or Hellenism, trying to follow ancient Greek ways. They really value historical accuracy.
Right. Trying to rebuild it based on evidence.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Then, on the other hand, you have eclectic paths. And this is probably more common numerically. Eclectic pagans draw inspiration from lots of different traditions. They might feel connected to a Celtic goddess, use runes for divination, and also incorporate elements from, say, Egyptian mythology. They build a personal path that resonates with them.
Okay, I can see how both fall under pagan, but are really different in approach. One's like historical deep dive, the other's more like a spiritual tapestry weaving.
That's a good way to put it. It shows paganism is really a category of worldviews, centered on things like nature reverence, often polytheism, but not a single church with a single book of rules.
And crucially, how does this connect back to witchcraft? The practice. Does being pagan mean you practice witchcraft?
Not necessarily. That's the vital distinction here. Many pagans do practice witchcraft or magic. It fits naturally with a lot of nature-focused or polytheistic views, but many don't. Think about that strict Roman Reconstructionist we mentioned. They might see magic, or what they define as witchcraft, as something separate, maybe even inappropriate for their specific religious focus based on their reading of history.
Oh, okay. So, paganism is the worldview, the broad category of faiths, ancient and modern. Witchcraft is a set of skills that might be used within that worldview, but isn't required.
Exactly. Paganism is the spiritual environment. Witchcraft is a tool you can choose to use in that environment, or not.
Okay. This is clarifying things nicely. We have the skill witchcraft, we have the big spiritual landscape paganism. Now, here's where I think a lot of the confusion really peaks. How does the specific religion Wicca fit into all this?
Right. Wicca. Okay, so Wicca sits firmly under that pagan umbrella we just talked about. It is a pagan religion. But the key difference is Wicca is defined as a modern, organized pagan religion. And that word organized is doing a lot of work there.
Organized.
Yeah.
Meaning it has fanders, specific structures, texts, unlike the more amorphous ancient pagan traditions.
Precisely. While Wicca draws inspiration from older folk, magic, mythology, and historical ideas, it was fundamentally put together, systematized, and brought to public attention in the mid-20th century. We're talking 1950s England. Figures like Gerald Gardner are central to its popularization, so it has a traceable, relatively recent origin point formulated for the modern world, even while honoring ancient themes.
Okay, so it's structured. What does that structure look like? What makes it a distinct religion, not just someone's personal pagan path?
Well, there are some core elements you typically find. There's usually a central theology focused on a god and a goddess, often called the Great Mother and the Horned God, or Lord and Lady. Variations exist, but that duality is common. There's also a defined ritual calendar, the 8 Sabbats, the seasonal festivals, the solstices, the equinoxes, and the points in between like Beltane and Samhain. These mark the wheel of the year, the cycles of life, death, rebirth.
And often practiced in groups, like covens.
Traditionally, yes, especially in lineages tracing back to Gardner. Covens often have formalized initiation, maybe degree systems marking progress, led by a high priestess and order high priest. That level of organization, that structure, you just don't usually find that in purely secular witchcraft or in many of the more free-form, eclectic pagan paths. This gives Wicca its strong identity as a specific religion.
And importantly, it seems Wicca brings a specific ethical code to the practice of witchcraft, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely crucial. We said witchcraft itself, the skill, is kind of neutral, right? Like a tool. Wicca deliberately adds an ethical framework for using that tool, and that's the Wiccan Rede. The most famous phrasing is, "And it harm none, do what you will."
And it harm none, do what ye will. That sounds simple, but I imagine it's quite profound in practice. It basically says freedom is fine as long as you're not causing harm.
It does, and it fundamentally shapes how Wiccans approach magic. It shifts the focus away from, say, coercive or manipulative spells towards things like healing, protection, personal growth, connecting with the divine. But, that phrase harm none isn't always simple. Wiccans often have deep discussions about what constitutes harm. Is influencing someone's choice harm? Is inaction harm? It forces ethical consideration into the magical practice.
Okay, so that really clarifies the connection. Wicca is a religion that practices witchcraft, but it does so within its specific theological framework, honoring the god and goddess, following the Sabbaths, and guided by a core ethical principle, the Rede.
Exactly. It's witchcraft integrated into a defined spiritual system. So you could say all initiated Wiccans are witches, in the sense they practice the craft, but absolutely not all witches are Wiccan.
It's like Wicca took the available technology of witchcraft and built a specific operating system and user agreement for it.
Huh. That's actually, that's not a bad analogy. A very clean, modern package under the big pagan umbrella.
Right. Okay. I feel like we've really pulled apart the strands here. The sources make much more sense when you separate these concepts.
Yeah.
So let's lock it down. Can we do a final really tight summary, putting the three terms side by side for everyone listening?
Yeah, let's connect those dots cleanly. We have the practice, the category, and the specific religion.
Okay, start with the core skill, the action.
1. Witchcraft. It's the practice of magic. Spells, rituals, skills, it's the how. It can be secular, it can be religious. Its methods and goals vary hugely. It's the baseline practice.
Got it. Then, the big picture view.
2. Paganism. That's the broad spiritual category. It includes lots of different polytheistic, nature-based religions and paths, both ancient revivals like Reconstructionism and modern mixes like eclecticism. It's the worldview. And crucially, practicing witchcraft is optional within paganism.
Okay. And the specific modern religion within that category.
3. Wicca. This is a specific modern pagan religion really codified in the mid-20th century. It does practice witchcraft, but does so within its own distinct structure, honoring a god and goddess, celebrating the Sabbaths, and following the ethical guideline of the Wiccan Rede, harm none.
Witchcraft. The skill. Paganism. The broad category, Wicca.
Yeah.
One specific religion within that category that uses the skill ethically.
That's the core takeaway, nailing that distinction.
And having that clarity, well, it helps you, the listener, navigate conversations about spirituality, about history, about modern beliefs, without accidentally mixing these terms up. You understand the nuances now.
Yeah, it allows for much more informed, respectful discussions about what are, for many people, deeply personal paths.
Definitely. And as we wrap up, maybe one final thought to leave you with, thinking about that timeline we discussed.
Yeah, consider this. Paganism has these incredibly deep roots, right? Ancient, often decentralized faiths, Greco-Roman, Norse, Celtic, and others existing long before and outside the big monotheisms. So thinking about that ancient, vast landscape, how does the emergence of something like Wicca, so relatively recent, so structured, so organized, with clear ethical rules, how does that represent maybe a uniquely modern way of trying to recapture, formalize, and perhaps ensure the survival of that ancient nature reverence in a world that often seems to demand clearer structures for spirituality?
That need for structure in the modern world versus the older ways. Yeah, that's fascinating. Definitely something to mull over. We hope this deep dive has brought some clarity. We really encourage you to keep exploring these distinct and honestly really rich concepts. Thanks for diving deep with us today.